What's going on, everybody in crypto? Got Malpass here with a very, very special guest, Mr. Sam. I am. It's been a little while since we got to sit down and have a conversation. Sam, I am honored for you to be here on the new channel. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing great, man. I'm getting over a bout of allergies here that I haven't had for a few years, but my voice is a little off, but I feel fine.
It's been going around everywhere, man. We've had a bad cough going around my house for a couple of days, and it's getting rough, and hopefully everybody gets through it pretty quickly, man. We're just tired of dealing with it ourselves. But I'm glad to hear you're feeling better.
Yep.
Haven't seen you put out any content in a little while. How long has it been since you put a video out?
I just did one a couple days ago, and I got like 5 different cures for the allergies of things people told me to try. I'm doing the garlic extract here because I happen to have it on hand. But I just put out a quick one. But before that, it was a couple weeks just because I could barely talk.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
but
it
yeah,
was
there's been a lot happening.
definitely. It's been rough trying to get some content out for myself. I didn't stream much last week. Didn't put out many videos last week with the holidays and trying to get over the cough and everything myself. So I definitely understand what you've been going through. Let's jump right into this thing, Sam. Outside of being sick, how is the world treating you? Everything going good for you?
Yeah, I can't complain. I had a week with my daughter. We've been doing science experiments. She just did a magic trick where she floated a paper clip on the water using surface tension. You put a paper towel under it, the towel sinks, the paper clip floats. Then you add a little dish soap, it breaks the surface tension and it sinks. So she took that one home to her mom and tricked her.
That's good, man. It's always a
So
good
yeah,
time
we
with the
had a good
kids.
time.
Yes,
It
always
is.
a good
She's
time. And
you
she's
know,
your
so
only daughter, right? You only have one kid.
she is.
Okay,
Yep.
that's a lot of fun, man. How old?
She just turned 5 recently.
Just
So
turned 5. Yes, I have one that just recently turned 6, so I know exactly what you're going through. That's definitely a fun age. Always have to keep them busy. But let's get into a little bit of crypto, and
okay.
let's talk about some things that are going on through the space, as far as some corridors that have been opening up. We have the new MoneyGram payout. They went ahead and finished paying them out the remainder of their $20 million. Where do you see things progressing now that we have MoneyGram paid off? What would you guesstimate? Let's break this down into two questions. What would you guesstimate would possibly be some next corridors to be opened up? And then also, what do you think the next level of advancement is for MoneyGram now that Ripple has got them completely paid off? Where are they going next?
Okay, good questions. Let's start with the 20 million that they called down. That's what I talked about in the last video. I think it was probably based on some milestones. I'm just guessing there, but I would assume that it wasn't just up to them to call it down whenever they wanted. That they probably had some kind of an agreement. Hey, you get these 2 corridors up and running, and then you can call down the additional 20. They did that. I'm a little confused on the various releases talking about the new corridors because there's somebody saying Europe is one of them, and I don't know who that is. Or some people are suggesting I think Coinbase maybe or something.
Hmm.
I know they're trying to get the one up in Brazil, but we haven't seen any kind of updates as far as how that's going, if that's been successful yet. Really, the only significant volume we're seeing right now is on the Bitso exchange in Mexico. Of course, they're very excited the based on the finance person from Swell talking through what they're doing and what they have going on. I think that's going to be huge. But then what was the other one? Australia. All I've seen from them is from Flash FX is they're talking about if you're moving money into Coinbase or into I think it's Coinbase, send it through us and we'll get it uploaded into your account faster. I'm not sure what all they have going on there, but uh, kind of things are happening. They're happening probably slower than we'd like. And then they've announced what are the other regions? Japan, which of course is going to be SBI. That one's been huge. I'm really surprised that that wasn't one of these initial ones coming out of the gate. I'm not sure really what they're waiting on or what the holdup is. Of course, we thought when the SBI exchange over there went live that that would be it, and they'd be up and running, but still that hasn't happened. I think there's a lot going on in the Middle East. We just saw a couple hours ago that Dilip Rao is retiring,
Oh
and
wow.
somebody in the comments of that announcement said, we assume that you got all the deals done, and he liked that. Maybe it's a confirmation of that statement, but I think that's certainly over the last year, looking at all the news and the announcements and the central banks doing trials with other central banks over there. I think that's going to be huge when they finally kick off. They've been, how would I put it? They've been out laying the tracks, but really like onboarding customers for the last year. And they still have loads of work to do to turn it up. They still have to bring in the market makers and find ways to balance payment flows and so forth. But, I think we're getting a lot closer than we have been to seeing some major utilities start to flow through.
For those
Does
that
that answer them?
Yeah, for those that don't know Dilip Rao, what is his position with Ripple? Do you know?
He's Mr. Cool Your Jets. He's I forget his exact title. I'd have to look it up, but he's basically been. I know he's been going out to the Middle East. He helped set up that office. He's been working with some of the larger banks. He might be like the I forget what his role is. I can look it up here real quick, but
I did not see where he actually posted that he is retiring. It's been a pretty busy morning for me so far, but
yeah,
it is good confirmation that he did like the post. But I would definitely like to hear something from him before he actually departs from the company on where he is progress wise. I think that would be a huge move in his behalf to really fill in the community. How do you feel about that?
yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think as investors, we mm, are a little too demanding of Ripple. I mean, they're a private company; they can do what they want, and of course, we want to know everything that's going on, and you need to report to us. And it's like, no, they don't. In his profile, Dilip says he's engaging with central banks, regional FMIs, and strategic projects to transform global transaction banking with Ripple. So he's just at a high level. I think he's somebody that has a lot of experience and was kind of floating around making bigger deals happen. And of course, I think what's going on in the Middle East region was had a lot to do with him. So, but
Absolutely.
the same thing, the same comment was made by Galgatron about the testing that Coinfield was doing. He commented like, "Oh, you guys should have announced to us." It's like, no, they don't have to announce anything. They're a private company. They have competitors. They're trying to make money, and they don't need to telegraph their plans to the XRP community because some people want to, make a big deal out of something and let their imaginations run wild and so forth.
That's exactly right.
It's uh, oversensitive.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's there's a lot of oversensitive sentiment going on in the community where everybody wants everything today. They don't want to sit
Yeah,
back and relax and actually let this thing transform. I was actually doing a video
yeah.
with the group over there on the chain, and
Uh huh.
that was one of the topics that come up was really and truly just needing to just let it play out and let them have the opportunity to build what they're actually trying to build, and instead of actually just rushing through it. I mean, everybody wants to be rich today, and it's like I was trying to explain to the guys on the chain that everybody, they remember 2017, but they don't remember the 6, 7, 8 years beforehand where crypto was just stagnant as it can be. So definitely, I 100% agree with the fact that we just need to relax a little bit and allow them to build what needs to be built in order to get where we need to get to. If you're comfortable in your investment, if you've
Yeah.
done your own
I,
research, go ahead.
I looked at Amazon price charts, and back in '99 they had a huge run up, and then it crashed way back down, and it sat there for like 2 to 3 years before it really started picking back up. And of course, today it's this was it was less than $10, and today it's over 1,600, and it's like it's not going to happen overnight. People saw that, yeah, this is a game changer, but at the same time, back then they had a lot of work to do to become who they are today, which is, the retail. I guess they're not retail, but the internet, the biggest internet retailer on the planet, as far as I know.
I was looking at Ripple executives. I just Googled Ripple executives, and the ex CEO of Swift, what's his name, Godfrey, is showing up as an executive. He is showing up as an executive for Ripple. Is that the case? Has he went to work for Ripple?
I don't think so. I think that's just the Google search algorithm. People are linking those two together, and there's been a couple others where people are connecting dots. They're too bored or whatever. They're connecting dots where they don't necessarily exist. I mean, he could come to work for Ripple. I don't think that he will. Of course, you had Brad say, "Hey, we're hiring," on stage with him, but I think his ego's. You go back to the story about GPI and where that came from Bob Way, where he met Gottfried and Wim Raymaker at the 2014 Bitcoin conference in Amsterdam, and basically spent 2 days talking to him for 2+ hours each day, explaining, here's what we do. Hey, it'd be great to partner with you guys. And we know later, probably from Marjan Delatine, that they came back to work that Monday and just, oh, we got a new top priority. Here it is. And it was GPI. And they just basically wholesale ripped off or tried to imitate what Ripple was doing to keep from becoming irrelevant, basically. And, while they've made some progress, like, when I worked at Hewlett Packard Agilent, we had like we were kind of the gold standard for data collection from the telecom network. So we had probes that would sit out in the data centers at different places in the network, depending on the actual technology, that was tapping the signaling links, capturing that data, and feeding it back to what's called the NOC, or the Network Operations Center, where they monitor the network for outages, backhoes and major storms and things that take the network down, and then they go out and fix it. And our hardware was like hands down the best out there, but our software and our interfaces were just absolutely terrible. And we had a R&D department over in Scotland, in the UK, and they had this NIH, not invented here mentality, that everything's got to come from us. We're the best at this, and yada yada. Meanwhile, we had this competitor, Tektronix, which had not so great hardware, but really good interfaces that the engineers liked using. It was very friendly, and it was way better than ours. And we could not get them to do open APIs. Not Tektronix, our R&D department. And actually, my first job when I got hired on was to come in, take one of the reports that R&D had produced, back engineer it, figure out how to produce our own reports in the field, which I did. And we turned that into a multi-million-dollar consulting business and reporting business. And we did studies and various engagements just based on that initial work. I can imagine Swift is very much like that. You look at the home presentation that they did, which David Schwartz described that as tender for banks. He said they wouldn't let me call it tender for banks, where they've got this really slick interface. It's really well integrated with the back end. It lets them partner up with other banks and do, all kind. It really does a good job of graphically and intuitively interfacing with RippleNet and allowing customers to see the potential and the capabilities of that platform and use them. Whereas if you look at the Swift, they have the same thing with their, I forget what they call it. There's like 4 components. I've done a video on it months back, but they have a directory that shows these are the metrics of how often, how fast they get payments through and how many of them are successful. That's got to be something like out of the 80s that looks, it's going to be nothing like what Ripple has put together. I don't think there's really much of a comparison. What Ripple's doing is really game changing in so many ways. And I think people tend to underestimate that, and they get hung up on, the price, James, it's 20 cents. Ha, 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 ha. And we get all this ridiculous stuff where I don't get it. I'm looking at the utility. I'm looking at the increased adoption. I'm looking at this slick interface that they put out that customers are going to love and they're going to use, that not only has like the gold standard of data, of capabilities, but it's also got the, really intuitive. It's like Amazon shopping. You bought this. Well, you also probably want these things to go along with it. It's just really, really slick. They really know what they're doing. It's a matter of time. I've said for a long time, it's a waiting game. We just got to sit back and be patient. And, when it drops to 20 cents or less, that's a buying opportunity, in my opinion.
So talking about data, I always like to get into something about scalability, because data is a huge part about scalability. At the moment, we're looking at 1,500 transactions per second, 1,500 TPS through the XRP ledger running that direction. When you're looking at something like Visa that has the 70,000 or whatever it is transactions per second that are going through their network. Is it a situation to where we have traded off interoperability or sustainability for scalability, or do you think that scalability is going to ramp up as we get further into the technology? Will this thing be able to scale better and compete with something like the Visa network that's doing in the 70,000 transaction per second range? Do we get there, or have we traded off?
Okay. I would say no, that we haven't traded off. And I think, let me think how to attack this. So let's start with Visa. Their network, first off, it's not distributed. It's centralized. I would imagine that it's regionalized as well, because, the U.S. credit card market, there's not as many people in Europe traveling from Europe over to the United States processing credit transactions. So, they probably have a data center that runs North America. They probably have one for Europe, for Africa, for, different continents or regions of the world. I don't know how they divide it up. And then they have some interoperability between those regions, would be my guess. So collectively, that can do 70,000 TPS. Okay, great. Now, when it comes to Ripple, we have 1,500 TPS on the base chain layer. Okay. And it's not so much about scalability, it's about immutability and being distributed and trustless, and all the things that blockchain gives us. So it's important to understand the paradigm shift that represents, and why those features are important. Now, on the 1,500 TPS, that's where we are today. They have indicated that they could take it to 10,000 TPS on the base chain layer. And I actually traded a comment with David Schwartz about this, and it was something to the effect of, if we raised it, what would that do to the requirements of the validators? So yes, they could take it up to 10,000 TPS, but it would further centralize who could run a validator, because the cost of the hardware, of the bandwidth, of all these other things, the disk storage and memory and so forth, would increase quite a bit. So that capability is there to scale up. They probably will at some point today. Even with someone trying to span the network, we're running at 50 TPS, right? So that's 30 times. We could scale up 30x. We had 30 more people running a spam attack that cost them 10 grand to do. It still wouldn't be maxing out, and the fees would start going up, and it would just get more expensive for them to engage in that kind of wash trading that we see going on today. Then you have payment channels, which they've tested to 20,000 and then 50,000, and I think 70,000 or 75,000. I forget the exact number. But that is really, if you've got two trading partners that are sending money back and forth, they do that over ILP on a private channel, and then at whatever interval they decide, be it the imbalance gets too big or it's some kind of time interval, they close that payment channel, they settle up with one transaction on the public chain, and then they open another channel and start trading back and forth again. You can do that to 70,000 or 50,000 TPS times however many of those channels you want to set up. So, in my view, it does scale to what Visa can do. It doesn't do it on the public chain. But again, you look at proof of work, Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, Bitcoin Cash, none of them even come close to the scale of where the XRP ledger is today.
What about
I like it when you pause and think.
Yeah, you throw a lot of information out there, man, and it's all great information. Especially when you talk about the how Visa is actually making the transactions per second work, because I was not aware of that, and I definitely appreciate that information. I was not aware that they're just basically have 4 or 5 different things set up, and they're all equaling that transaction per second. They're not actually, you don't have one entity doing that transaction per second like what Ripple has going.
That's my guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't work for Visa. I've never seen their system, but I would imagine they've got some regional databases that are set up because, if you think about it, you've got customers and accounts. It would make sense to regionalize those for different parts of the world, different regulatory regions and so forth, and then just interoperate between them. I was a solution architect, so that's the kind of thing I would, and I used to work with large Oracle databases. So that's the kind of thing that I would architect if it were me, but who knows what they've come up with. I suspect it's something along those lines.
We have some other people that are working with the XRP ledger, that are working with XRP, trying to bring all of this together, and we haven't heard a lot from them as far as SBI and R3. Have you heard any recent updates on either one, SBI or R3? Where are they at? Are they still pushing forward? Any ideas?
I don't. For SBI, Crypto Eddie's my go-to gal on that. She's, keeps up with all that stuff. I know there were a couple announcements that I've seen out of them. They're still making forward progress. Again, I'm a little befuddled as to why they haven't launched with a corridor for Japan yet. I don't know the answer to that. As far as R3 goes, no, I really haven't seen any news out of them. I wonder about the kind of tuft between Ripple and R3, and if that's actually settled, or if, I think certainly SBI came in and said, look, y'all are gonna sort out your differences and drop this court case. And I think that's absolutely what happened. At the same time, though, there can still be some animosity and some undermining, and that's just very corporate culture kind of thing to do. So I wouldn't be surprised if something like that is going on. Who knows? Um, However, their customers are the big banks. Their customers are existing Ripple partners. If they think they're going to play any kind of major role and cut Ripple out of the picture or XRP out of the picture, I think they're fooling themselves, because at the end of the day, they're going to serve their customers or somebody else will.
So we have HSBC that has been in the news here recently. They're starting this securities vault. Have you studied up on that any? Do you know of any details on that?
I read the news article that came out about that, where they moved 20 billion, which was a significant portion, 40 or 60% of their
That's right.
of their securities or whatever it was, onto the blockchain. My question is, what blockchain are they using? Is this a DTCC kind of thing? Um, and it also reminded me of one of the people on Twitter, the Marvin Gaye account, where he gave us that diagram of Swift and AIIB, and he said the money's moving east to west or west to east, and it specifically called out HSBC as part of that process. And now we have this, the first major blockchain announcement where they're moving real money into it. I suspect it's probably something like DTCC or something along those lines. And at some point down the road, they might turn up the ability to settle with the XRP ledger or the quantum financial system. I don't know. But it's interesting. It caught my attention for sure.
I posted a video on this channel last week sometime that was Bank of Santander that was talking about things that they have going on and their excitement about what they have going on with Ethereum smart contracts, with stocks and such like that. With us seeing Ethereum and Bitcoin transactions that are happening on the ledger, I know some of them are the spam that we discussed earlier, but we still have transactions of that going across the XRP ledger. I wonder, could it be a situation to where, and it's purely speculation, could it be a situation where they are doing the same thing as Santander, where they are reaching out to Ripple for payment custodies and such like that, and maybe reaching out to a different project altogether for situations like securities and stocks?
So you're asking if the wash trading could be some testing of that nature?
No, I'm asking, what are the odds of HSBC doing their securities trading on something like Ethereum smart contract?
I mean, they could be. If I were a bank, though, Ethereum's already running into scalability problems, and what's their market cap? A few $1 billion, and they're talking 20 billion for one bank, and that's not even all of it. It's such a difference in scale that, like, I can't see a bank coming in and sitting down and saying, yeah, we're gonna go full steam ahead here. Maybe on some kind of trial basis, but that's one of the things that Ripple stands out from everybody else, is they have a scalable solution. The others are trying to do some kind of bolt-on scalability solution on this airplane that's flying across the Atlantic. And I just can't see Go ahead.
That's 100% my thought as well. And that's really the message that I was trying to portray in the comments of that video that I done, because everybody's like, well, I see Ethereum. And I'm trying to explain to them that Ethereum, I don't think they have the capabilities with what they have going on, with the problems and the transitions from proof of work to proof of stake. I don't feel like that even Santander, even though they come out and said, hey, we're excited about the smart contracts features of this platform, I still don't see that being an end goal for anybody, considering that you could also build smart contracts on the XRP ledger. Not to mention that sooner or
Yes.
later, we're going to have Codius that's going to be up and running, and that's nothing but smart contracts, correct?
Yeah.
So,
And it's distributed. It's separate from the blockchain. You know, these banks are so conservative. I mean, look at what they've done with Ripple. They trial them for a year plus. We used to do 3-month trials in telecom, and that was a long time. They're trialing them for a year plus. That's after generally they've been talking to them for 3 to 6 months to, maybe even a year in a lot of cases. And these guys they're handling other people's money, and they're on the hook for that money until the government comes in and bails them out. But they are very, very conservative, and they want to know this is something that works, that's dependable and reliable, because they have competitors. It's a saturated market, and then they also have all of these new speedboats, as I talk about them, coming in. The payment processors, the Amazon, Apple, all of these. Banking's just about to completely transform, and it will look nothing like it does today in 5-10 years time. So there's just so many changes, but I can't see them just jumping into bed with Johnny come lately.
in that same video, I found out that central banks have been working on CBDCs for the past 3.5 years. That's still well behind what we have currently going on with Ripple and XRP and the XRP ledger. They're still behind, but in the future, what do you see the CBDCs? What do you see that looking like as we start to move money? Do you see a situation to where we have each central bank has their own CBDC, and then potentially something like XRP being a bridge between these, or do you see XRP being used in a greater way besides just that bridge?
Did you see the Finastra video I did about their patent?
I did not.
Okay, definitely go watch that one. So Finastra built a CBDC system, and they wrote a patent for it, and I covered that in detail. And it basically these guys have been working with Ripple since I think it's 2014, and then this patent was filed in 2015. So they were sitting down with David Schwartz and Ethan,
Ethan Beard?
the usual crowd, the early crowd there at Ripple. Yeah. Not who, Stephen Thomas is who I was thinking of. I'm sure they were sitting down with those guys. They got an earful on consensus and why it's better than proof of work and so forth. So their system creates a sextillion dollars, which is a one with a whole bunch of zeros behind it, and then the commercial banks can get an account. It's centralized, it's permissioned, it's immutable, sort of. They can actually do a reverse transaction, and so they basically took what Ripple had created and then adopted it for the practices of the central bank and give them the features. It also has a like a pool in it to where if there's insufficient funds, the transaction doesn't fail. It goes into a queue, and then the queue will keep checking back for, are there funds available now? Are there funds available now? And when they do, that transaction will go through. So, and of course, Ripple XRPL works nothing like that because it's an immutable blockchain and permissionless and decentralized and all that. So they built it on the principles of the XRP ledger, adapted it for the central banks. That's and they also made it to where you can customize it for differences around the world that one central bank may do something a little bit different over here. So they built in the flexibility to kind of adapt and change it. Um, so that's what I see, where Finastra has created this CBDC kind of gold standard blockchain. And I think the different central banks are going to pay them to a maintenance fee to use that system and maintain it and so forth. And then, one of the things I've said about CBDCs is, well, they have to have the ability to increase the money supply, because, they're not all of a sudden going to stop acting like drunken sailors and spending money like it's somebody else's, and there's no accountability, because there's not. Uh, they're going to need to be able to print money for the new war or the new frog study in some remote part of the world, which is just a handout to their buddies. So they've done that by creating this ridiculous amount of tokens, essentially in the from the get go, with this $100 sextillion or whatever it was, and then they just draw on that massive balance. And if they were to ever issue at all, the currency would be hyperinflating, and they'd have to go to something else anyway. So not a big deal. So they solved that problem. There's a risk, and I hate to do this, even talk about it, because people are going to be like, oh, freaking out, and the sky is falling and everything else. But talk about what I think. There's a risk that maybe like the IMF could come in, do their own CBDC, and back it with fiat from just like they do for the SDR today. Back it with a basket of fiat currencies, perhaps a pile of gold that they get from these other countries, and then you have the CBDCs in there exchanging funds with the IMF, kind of acting as using their CBDC to act as the global bridge currency. That's a possibility. Will they do that? I don't know. I've got some doubts. I'd have to go through and think about it, why it wouldn't work. I don't think that's the direction they're going. I think what Finastra has done is they came in, they sat down with Ripple, they heard the vision of where they're going, what they're doing, so forth, and they built a system for the central banks to use that interoperates perfectly with the XRP ledger. And the issuances, I wonder if they will do partial issuances of their fiat on the XRP ledger to be able to trade that back and forth. That's kind of what the Bank of America patent, what that was showing us, is the Singapore dollar issuance, perhaps on the XRP ledger, perhaps it's a CBDC. We don't really know. But I think that's kind of the world that we're heading into, where the central banks have their CBDCs. It's not something that Joe Sixpack is going to have a wallet and bring that up and so forth. It's for commercial wholesale settlement. The patent also talks about there are corporates who have jumped through the regulatory hoops, having access or being given an account, and therefore some privileges and so forth that the large commercial banks have. So I think, that's the world we're heading into. Exactly what it's going to look like, this whole quantum financial system. Richie Rich told us that's real. I don't know exactly what it is. Is it a quantum computer? Maybe, but I doubt it, because that technology is so far out. I think it's a name kind of thing. But supposedly that's a big settlement system between the central banks that uses XRP as the digital gold to shift around and do settlement at a large level, at a high level.
I wonder with it, maybe if it's not quantum computing, but maybe something that's been right there in front of us the whole time that we've discussed several times with Cobalt. By watching the video from Santander, hearing that guy talk about Cobalt, I believe that's a monster that really and truly just hasn't been woken up yet. Really curious to see what that looks like once that starts to happen. Exactly what Cobalt is and what it actually does. But all right, so we talked about a lot of different
Well,
things. Go ahead.
let me touch on Cobalt real quick. Um, so that was initially that was a change in the algorithm of how XRP worked. It was designed to improve security. Ethan McBeard, who authored it, it was designed to improve security as kind of a side benefit. Could have it had the potential to bring transaction times down to sub 1 second or block times, I think. So it has a lot of benefits. It also what would it do? It would work to kind of slow down the network a little bit more efficiently than it does today. But I had a conversation with Bob Way, and I said, Bob, I'm really frustrated with like this whole Cobalt thing. We don't have a roadmap. There's so many questions about it. We're not really getting answers from anybody. And I think he used his back channels, and Nick Borgelis came out and basically gave us an update and said that they have implemented some sort of bolt-on fixes that gave them probably 80% of the benefits that doing what he described as putting Cobalt in at this point is like changing the engine on a 747 in mid-flight. Not something they looked forward to or wanted to do. And the further down the road we get with this thing, I would say the less likely it is to happen. So I don't think that it will happen, at least in the context that it's been described to us as what it is. It's not something that they would ever be able to sneak in. I see comments about that all the time where people are like, oh, is this Cobalt? Is this Cobalt? It's like, no, they would have to propose that. All the validators would get to read it, you and I as well included, and then they would vote on it for 2 weeks, and then it would go in, and there'd be a lot more attention around it if that was actually being implemented. So it's not something that's just going to pop up one day and it's live. It's something that we would all know about. But again, I don't think it's going to happen because they did some workarounds. They fixed it, or at least they found other methods to get to the 80% of what it would provide without the major engine change out in flight kind of thing.
Realistically, mass adoption, you always hear this term thrown out there, and everybody has a different view on exactly what mass adoption is. My viewpoint on mass adoption is basically going to a digital society. Everybody across the board, we're digital. We're digital. Realistically, I personally see 5-10 years out before we're at that level. What about you? Where do you think we are before we see a full-blown mass adoption? Everything's running to scale. Everybody is in place, making their moves, and we're full-blown implemented.
I think it's happening in stages. Sorry about that. I think it's happening in stages. So first stage is what Ripple's doing, as their primary stated use case, getting the friction out of payments, implementing RippleNet, turning up those corridors. I think that's going to, that changeover has started. It's MoneyGram's the key to all of this. What they have to do is open up corridors, start sending payments across, and then in the background, if you remember that phone call that Brad said he got from Alex, the CEO of MoneyGram, saying, "Hey, you guys hurry the F up." I don't know if I can cuss on your show or not, but he said, "Hey, you're not going fast enough." Well, I guarantee you, as soon as Brad got off the phone with him, he either called or messaged Miguel Valles and said, "Hey, can you pick things up a little bit and make this happen faster?" Because MoneyGrams over here, they can send, they're only sending 10%. They could turn that on to 90% like that with the flip of a switch. But on the Bitso exchange, the buy orders would dry up just as fast as they, within a few minutes of them flipping that switch. So you have to balance things. For every sell, there's a buyer, And so what Miguel Valles is doing is he's in there working on the back end of this with the market makers, talking to them, getting them to come into these exchanges as they turn up these corridors around the world, and getting them to see that, hey, there's an opportunity for you to create a new business to profit from this, just like you do in the FX markets today. And by the way, it's a nascent market. Your margins are going to be better for the next several years until it really gets established and competition moves in. And so that's the current challenge, like that I see them taking on right now. Is MoneyGram can give them volume anywhere in the world as much as they want. Drink from the fire hydrant if you want. But at the same time, Ripple and Miguel Valles has to be in there with the market makers, bringing those two parties together and helping them ramp things up. And then I think once they see that it's profitable, that it's a good business for them to engage in, that's going to attract competitors, other market makers, so that you have two or three in the marketplace. And once they see that, oh yeah, we can do this for $10,000 transactions. Let's do it for 100. Let's do it for $1 million. Let's do it for 10 million. And that's where you need to be for the banks to be able to come in. So MoneyGram is warming up the pools. I've talked about that since the Ripple Riddler days, where they've got to do something to kind of prime the pump and bring these corridors up and get the liquidity flowing. Because if not, it's just going to fall flat on its face. And that's the phase that they're in. Now, going back to your original question of, well, when do we get to mainstream adoption? I think what the banks are doing is going to take at least till next year, maybe even a year after that. So 1 to 2 years there. At the same time, you have what Coil's doing and Xspring and all the others. They are in the I wouldn't even say early adopters. They're in the innovator stage of the technology lifecycle adoption curve. So they're, it's literally, they have like a shared workspace in San Diego, and you have like the Puma browser guys are in that workspace, and some of the other companies that they've invested in, they're all coming into the same office, working very small, very early days for a lot of these. Then you have, Coinfield and Sologenic and all that, and they're much further along, much further down the road. However, it's early days for that. I see that kind of adoption taking, I would say, 5 to 10 years, maybe even 15 or 20 at the late end, to where we're going to be kind of at the peak of new adoption. It's hard to describe without the technological adoption curve, but it's a bell curve, and you eventually peak out where you've got more and more and more new users coming in, and eventually you start to get still lots of new users coming in, but the new users every month peaks and it starts to taper off over time. So I think we'll reach that peak in like 5 to 10 years, somewhere in there. Or, like what you're talking about, where Internet of Value, we're doing micropayments by the billions in a day. You've got machines paying other machines, like David Schwartz has talked about, and just we're in a different world. So,
well, all your followers know how bullish you are on XRP, the digital asset, and they also know that you really like Monero also, for the privacy side of that situation. Are there any other projects that you're interested in? Which are they, and what makes you interested in those projects?
So number one, I'm watching Elixir, which is the network like XRP Ledger, and Praxis, which is the token like XRP. Uh, that's got this David Charum guy behind it, who's longtime privacy advocate and so forth. I think what they're doing is, if Monero is Bitcoin, is the Bitcoin of privacy. Uh, Praxis is the XRP of Bitcoin, of Monero, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So Monero is a great privacy token. So is Praxis, but it switches from proof of work and distributed mining to consensus. And it's got the speed and it's got the scalability and it's got a messaging platform in it. It takes care of metadata problems. There's a lot of all the proof of work coins right now are trying to do Mimblewimble and Daisy and all of these other projects to do bolt-on privacy. And while they'll have some success with that, I don't think it's going to be as good as a token or a project that's been designed with privacy in mind from day one, right? Where something that's been built from the ground up with privacy and protecting user information, user data, metadata from the get go. So, and then you still have all the scalability issues with proof of work that you don't get with consensus. So I really like that project. Then there's probably a dozen others that, I always look for utilities. So, or I look for utility and I look for like uh, the chance to like make a dent in the universe, like Ripple talks about. So Holo, decentralizing the internet. If I don't know if they're going to be able to pull that off, but they have a real product. They're putting it out there, and they have an ecosystem that seems to make some basic sense. You've got content providers wanting to host their content. They need fuel to pay for hosting, same model that we have today. And Holo's kind of created an ecosystem to allow that. It's certainly not going to do everything out of the gate, but if they can get a foothold and find that beachhead, they're not there yet, but if they can, I think that has the potential to be a successful project. Casino coins, another one. I've talked about having the KYC AML be a real opportunity, or I think a game changer for gaming sites, to where it takes all the compliance stuff out of their hands and just bring your tokens and you're good to go. And I think that's a smart model for that industry. Um, what else? Chainlink has certainly been doing real well. It makes sense what they're doing. What I don't understand right now is why do you need the token, right? I mean, they created this Oracle network where they're querying different data sources and bringing that into the blockchain, and it's distributed and it's mutable and all the stuff. So those are all good, valuable features, but why do I need the token in order to do that? Why couldn't they create that service and offer it to the banks or Swift or whoever it is to bring that data in? Um, and then, the other thing is, okay, let's say they can get the price of Ethereum or Bitcoin or whatever onto the Swift network so they can somehow down the road enable transactions with other cryptocurrencies. Is a bank going to roll the dice from one month to the next that Bitcoin is going to be functioning properly, that it's not going to, you've got XRP that's 3 to 4 seconds to move the physical or the digital token, whereas you have all the other competitors that cost way more and are taking 3 minutes to 10 minutes to 20 minutes to, in a bull run, several days, and you're going to end up paying more than Swift and taking longer than Swift. So, like, what's the value there? So, what other projects? B Chain's got a lot of hype around it. Uh, supply chain, if they can figure that out, the key there with so many of these is if it requires someone entering data into a database, well, they what's to stop them from putting the sticker on the product that didn't meet the standards, and it's um, it doesn't have as compelling of a use case. There's a use case there. Will the cost of the system and the overhead and all that justify it? In some, it probably will. In some, it won't. But there's so many. Oh gosh, there's what 3,000 plus tokens out there now, and your odds of doing well with them are less than 1 in 100. So do your own research and really take some time to know what you're investing in. Don't just jump on because someone on YouTube said, "Oh, this is it."
And that's I preach that a lot on this channel to really go and dig into what all of the content creators really go and dig into what we're talking about and do your own research, and make sure that you understand what it is that you're dealing with. You mentioned Elixir. I'm really fascinated with Elixir and David Chum. I think he's doing a great project. And I'm really fascinated with the fact that it's not really a blockchain. It's not really like that. It's more along the lines of tubes, and the tubes are carrying information. And as the information is carrying through the tube, it's destroying the tube behind it. And that's how they get the privacy of what it is that they're doing. And I'm really digging into Elixir. I'm actually registered in their community and get a lot of emails and conference calls and stuff like that from that team, and I'm just really excited to see where that goes in the future. A lot of people don't know that David Chum really was early days back in the mid 90s. He actually created a privacy coin that the U.S. government ended up shutting down, and there's a lot of people that don't know that about him. But he's a very interesting character that's been doing this for a very long time. A lot of people call him the grandfather of blockchain technology, and he's definitely a smart man.
Yeah, I can add to what your tube analogy reminded me of the congressman talking about the internet. It's got tubes and whatever. What you're describing is Seamix, is what they call Seamix. It's you have the network randomly selects a group of validators, right? And there's like maybe 4 of them, and each validator will take and mix the messages. That's where you've got pipes coming in, you've got inputs, you've got outputs, and it's mixing them up, and then it passes to the next one, which mixes them up, passes to the next one, mixes it up, next one mixes it up. And somehow through this whole process, the message that went in gets to the end user, the intended recipient of the message, but you don't get the metadata and so forth along with it. And then at some kind of predetermined interval, that whole thing gets scrapped, and a new set of validators is chosen at random, and they come up with their own mixing. Each validator does the same process. They pre-compute a bunch of the calculations that are necessary to send things through, and that's how they get their really high throughput of messaging, because it's a token platform, but it's also an instant messenger, which I think helps anonymize the traffic that's going through it. So, like, if the Enigma machine was broken by Hail Hitler at the beginning of every message, and they were able to decode it based on that because you had this set message coming out every morning. Well, if it was all payment data, it's going to be easier to kind of figure out what's going on. But when you throw in messaging on top of that, and you have people sending text messages and things back and forth mixed in with the payment data, it does a better job of anonymizing what's happening on the network. So I think it's a very interesting project, and I think it's going to be You've got Bitcoin and XRP. That's a quantum leap in technology, in my opinion. And I think the same is true for Elixir and Praxis compared to Monero. I think it's going to be a really fantastic privacy platform. And I think it's going to be an evolutionary leap because it's moving to consensus and gets away from proof of work and constantly forking their chain and, all the things that they do to remain a solid privacy based project.
Well, we're hitting on right about an hour, but I'm not going to let you out of here without really and truly talking about the price of XRP just for a second. We don't have to go into too much of elaboration on things. I don't want price predictions. I don't want that from you. What I want to talk about is the network, the ledger getting congested, and off of that ending up causing transaction fees to have to rise in order to fix the situation with the low price of what XRP is now. Do we get to a point to where we know that Bob Way has a patent that will allow some price increase? Do we get to a point with the way the market is that we have to reach in and grab this patent and change the price of XRP in order to keep the congestion off of the XRP ledger to keep the price of transactions down? How do you feel about that scenario?
Well, I would say first that there was a price increase from this BTC IOU wash trading that's going on. It went from, what was it, like 0.00012 to 2, which is still a fraction of a penny for a transaction. So like I don't see a scenario like we have with Bitcoin where it would even hit $5, much less $50, at least not in the next decade. And the network algorithm does a great job of kind of self-regulating that. So as the volume goes up, the fees get more expensive. And if there are people spamming the network, then it's going to cost them a lot more. And I think that's largely is going to be a self-correcting problem. Today, it's a big deal that they're sending, 4 or 5 million transactions in a day. And there was a story on the Motley Fool, which is a very well-known financial publication that a lot of people read, that talked about, it's MoneyGram is the one driving this, James. It's, they're in this partnership with Ripple, and now we have 4 million transactions per second. Therefore, MoneyGram is the culprit. And like, I looked up the author on Twitter, sent him a link to my video saying, no, this is wash trading. It's people trying to create hype to drive the speculation up. And, I talked about it before Swell. I think that they kicked that off a couple of weeks before Swell to, generate speculation and hype that, there's something big being announced at Swell. And of course it peaked right at Swell, and then they started selling and it dumped down. Well, I think they've probably bought back in, and the dump that came after that maybe caught them by surprise. And now they're trying to turn it back around, because I was surprised to see it kick back off again, because it pretty much stopped a week after Swell. And then here recently in the last couple of weeks, it's picked up, and it's several orders of magnitude over what it was, to tie in with some of the news and stuff that we have coming out. But again, legitimate payments that are moving back and forth that we have today is probably less than 5 transactions per second. So today 50 is relevant, and it makes a splash. In a few years down the road, it's going to be noise that nobody will even notice. So it's not going to be effective. So I think utility is going to solve that problem.
Absolutely. So you don't ever see a situation where Bob Way's patent might be implemented in order to take care of certain types of situations in the ledger.
What was it ever figured out, like exactly how he was doing that with the patent? Because I remember, I don't understand. I've read through some of his patents. I didn't know exactly what he was hinting at. Do you know for sure?
Only thing that I know is that he had briefly touched on the fact that he had a patent that would increase the price of XRP. But my first thought went to, okay, if he can increase it, then he can decrease it also. So my train of thought went a different direction from what he was actually trying to explain, and I didn't really understand everything as well. But like I said, the only thing that I really caught on to was it did have a patent that could potentially increase the price of XRP.
Yeah, so he discussed for a while before, or as part of that discussion, there's lots of methods. You can do a giveaway, but that crashes the price. You can burn tokens. Look at Stellar. That crashed the price. There's so many ways to distribute tokens that have a negative impact and go against what you're trying to do. And so that's the problem he was trying to solve. He says that he came up with something, and it's in one of, I think he's got 2 or 3 patents with his name on it. I never figured out what that is or what he was describing. So I don't think I mean, there's plenty of ways Ripple could lower the price. The trick is, how do they build utility and drive the price up at the same time, because they're going to be distributing tokens, as they have been, to partners and so forth, to give them the tools they need to start using XRP. I don't know what that answer is. Like I said, I never figured out exactly what he was hinting at. Maybe somebody has. Please hit me up on Twitter if you have.
That's right. But like I say, man, we're hitting on just probably just a little bit over an hour, Sam. I'm not going to keep you all afternoon, man. I'm so honored to have you here on the channel. I'm always a huge fan of you, and just keep on working hard, man, and keep on educating the community, and I'm just really proud to call you my friend, sir, and I definitely appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, no problem, man. I appreciate it, and I'm glad to see you're striking out on your own and starting a channel. I think the more people we have, the better it is for all of us, and different people are going to appeal to different folks out in the community. So
that's right. But all right, guys, we're gonna get ready to wrap this thing up. Sam, like I say, it's always a pleasure, guys. Hey, as always, guys, we may not have it all together, but together we can have it all. Participate in somebody's life. If they don't know something, help them out, pick them up and bring them up to your level, just like Mr. Sam has done for me today. He has sat down and had a conversation with me to help me understand things by his perspective. Do that to your fellow neighbor. Do that to somebody else in the community, and let's build together, and let's move through this thing together, and we'll be a whole lot better off on the other end of it, guys. Hey, get your crypto off the exchanges. Man, it's not safe out there. You don't want to be somebody over there in IDAX. You don't want to have your funds where you can't get to them, guys. Get it off the exchanges. Put it somewhere where you know it's safe, to where you can take care of it yourself. If you don't own the keys, you don't own the crypto. Guys, I definitely appreciate every one of you that come in to watch the video. Please like, please subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.